get out of your comfort zone and like go meet people, like go have experiences, like go do things that may feel really like odd or different or whatever, because it may seem like really extra odd and weird at the time, but like so many times I get inspired by like random things, or someone who I met happens to know someone else, and that leads to another conversation and another opportunity.
This is You Should Talk To, a podcast for busy marketing leaders who are looking for support and tips on getting shit done. In each episode, Daniel Weiner interviews marketing leaders and discusses their experience, successes, and failures around hiring agencies. If you're interested in finding and choosing the right agency partner, then let's jump in.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the You Should Talk To podcast. I am Daniel Weiner, your host, and this podcast is currently brought to you by myself as well as You Should Talk To until we get our first sponsor. You Should Talk To pairs brands and marketers for free with vetted agencies and or freelancers for virtually any marketing or tech need. Why? Because finding great agencies is an enormous pain in the ass. Super excited to be joined today by Jason Schulweis, the former EVP of Brand Partnerships and Creative Studio at a little-known company called Morning Brew. Jason, thank you so much for joining.
Daniel, thank you so much for having me. Very excited to be here and chatting with you today.
I would feel remiss to not mention to my millions of viewers that this is round two, which round one prompted me to buy an entire new computer, reevaluate my podcasting career, and send Jason 27 different apologies for wasting his time on round one. But we are back.
I was giving you an out by not saying great speaking to you again.
We're all about transparency on this podcast. Nice. You know, I never want to sugarcoat the life of the podcast world. So yeah, that was a very interesting experience. Full body sweat for me, and we're back with a Mac Mini. Shout out Apple and the Apple Store.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, let's dive back in again. Let's start with a little bit of controversy. What is a hot take of yours or an unpopular opinion that you have in the marketing or partnerships world?
Can I give you two? One that is a little bit more real than the other?
You can give me three if you want, Jason.
Oh, wow. I'll stop at two.
Okay.
So the first one, as we get warmed up, is that I think it would be amazing if one day that the concept of a make good could work both ways. And what I mean by that is that so often on, the publisher or vendor side, if we under deliver or if something, doesn't go perfectly right, we often have to make good or, make back up the media or spend in some way. I think it'd be super cool down the road if publishers or vendors like over delivered and really go above and beyond, that the reverse ends up being true. And that, we would end up just getting, more money by default. I think that would just be super.
A performance partnership model of sorts.
There you go. Maybe it already exists, and I was just doing the wrong thing.
I think brands would sweat if they're hearing that. They're like, don't tell agency partners that if they over exceed our expectations, we owe them more money. That should just be what happens every time.
Yeah, it'd be great. And then the other one that is, I think a bit more, call it prescient and timely, is that I think the creator economy is about to undergo quite a large shift. I think the pendulum of what that has been has swung so far into the everyone is a creator, the full democratization of creating. And I think the mid and long tail of that has gotten enormous. And so my, I guess, hot take, I don't even know if it's a hot take, but that is going to start swinging back to kind of like, the mid and short, back to premium in a meaningful way over the next year.
Interesting. So you think like the Joe Schmo creator, things are going to lean back to like quote unquote real creators, or where do you think, which way is it swinging?
Yes, back to, and it's even like, it's interesting with like real creators. It's creators, people who have like real influence, people who have, real followings, real communities, the things that maybe cannot necessarily be as easily commoditized or bought, such as audience and reach and things like that. So, I think it's been an amazing shift, and it's been, I think, awesome for the larger content and media industry, getting more people involved and, really opening up, I would say, business lines and a whole new economy, for a lot of the industry and a lot of creators. But I do think some of that's going to start to course correct a little bit back to not necessarily where it was, but I have a belief that it's kind of, easier to turn this, like, almost like celebrities into creators than creators into celebrities.
No, I agree. I mean, I think you see that with like Mr. Beast and stuff like that, for example, who opens up, who knows if it's even good, a burger shop and has, sells out an entire mall and stuff like that. I saw David Dobrik actually open his pizza shop over the weekend.
Was it Doe Brick or Doe Bricks?
I walked right into that name. As somebody with the last name Weiner, I always like a punny last name of a play on words. But yeah, I mean, even that, like, I actually heard the pizza was pretty good, but I have no clue. But yeah, like, these creators like open up any sort of business and it's somewhat an overnight success, to your point. So
right. And it is because they have already, I mean, those two in particular have already reached and well surpassed a threshold where they are celebrity. Like, they have an insane community around them that will do anything that they say. And so once you get to that point, then you unlock the ability to create brands and commerce and, all of these other really interesting things, but that those things are not necessarily available to, the early stage creators because they haven't built all of those, things yet. You can't just say, like, I'm going to launch a brand, a food brand, a clothing brand, and expect that people follow suit. You need real influence in a real community in order to do that.
Sure. You touched on a very important word there in community. I presume most of my audience has heard of Morning Brew as an avid reader. But for the few who have not, how would you describe it? Community, media empire, I would probably lean towards and stuff like that. How do you typically even explain what Morning Brew is if you had to in one or two sentences?
Media empire, I like. Let's just go. It's a media empire, period.
Move on. Yeah. Media
empire. No, it's it's a collective of brands that simplify subjects that matter using insight, levity, and wit. Now that, that is the mission statement that we had developed over the last few months. And what that means is, if you break that apart, right, collective of brands, all of those brands are actually built for communities of people and have unlocked this word of community. Like, we didn't talk about audience because audience is a very kind of like one way type of relationship and conversation. Sure. Whereas, we have built, and I say, well, I'm going to just continue to say we, even though I'm no longer at Morning Brew.
Sure.
We had built this structure where there is an education arm where students and professionals are learning together around the brand, where there is a marketing brew summit, a retail brew summit, where, the people who read and subscribe to marketing brew and retail brew are all getting together, like, around the brand and around the content. And there's a lot of, subscriber to subscriber kind of at scale interaction, not just this, Morning Brew 2 audience, type of thing. And so that's the kind of collective of brands that are all doing something, simplifying subjects that matter. That is probably, half of Morning Brew's superpower, is the ability to take very complicated things and make them uncomplicated. That was how Morning Brew was started from day one. Alex and Austin at University of Michigan, which was the business world and finance, is like, there's a lot of shit that's going on every single day. How do you like make that conversational and simple, in a 5 to 10 minute read? And then the second part of the, the superpower is the insight, levity, and wit piece, which is the, if you read Morning Brew and you compare it to anything else, like, what's Morning Brew because of the tone and the voice. And so that insight, levity, and wit was a way to describe and define what the tone and voice both was and is.
Sure. I think one of the most impressive things I think of, like, I don't necessarily, I guess I wouldn't consider myself a creator. I consider myself someone who creates content, however, but just the thought of like, the inbox is ever growing a more sacred place where people do not want noise, and to have a daily piece of content that has grown so significantly. And it's truthfully like an intimate thing. I think we talked about it on our first recording. Like, most people are starting their day with it, presumably. I don't know if you guys had data or have data on like when people are, spending the most time with it, but I'm typically reading it in bed. It's like the first thing every morning. It's become ritual. Like, the thought of having something to create something every single day, which I do typically like for LinkedIn, but I know people are going to come and go. They may see it in a week and stuff like that. Like timely stuff, just the engine and the machine that it takes to produce something like that so relevant is just, it's astonishing and impressive.
Thank you. And there is data around it, but even before then, it really started with more of even a consumer or personal insight, which is that the inbox is, to your point, it's like the most intimate environment that exists right now. It is the new homepage, right? Like that is your life homepage, as you said. It's like the first thing that you open when you wake up.
Sure.
I think for me, it was like, I would always have that, like I would either open like that immediately or my time hop immediately. And like, those are like the two things that, like I would open right away when I wake up. And the word that you used also in ritual, Morning Brew also has the data where, I think it was 92% of the Morning Brew community views Morning Brew as a daily ritual, right? Like, so everyone does see Morning Brew as that habit. And it's a very powerful canvas, and an opportunity for, content delivery, but also, brands and, and the agency partners that we work with who are working with brands to see that as an opportunity to own a certain part of everybody's morning. It's a pretty powerful thing.
Sure. And how early on were you at Morning Brew?
I joined in the middle of 2019.
Wow. And when did it officially start?
I would say 2017 is kind of the launch of,
What are some,
in
what
its
are,
current,
go ahead.
no, I was going to say in its kind of like current form, a little bit before that, it was also a PDF that was called something else that Alex was like sending out to, a couple thousand people, University of Michigan. But, 2017, I think is the current, most current, iteration of what you see. And then I would say like 2015 is the real genesis.
Sure. What are some of the, your greatest accomplishments and things you're most proud of during your tenure there?
There's just too many to name.
Sure. To forming a media empire,
Right, exactly. That's the easy part. No, there are a few things. There obviously the, our ability to create something that, we were able to help, sell the company in and of itself to Insider and Axel Springer, that the exit isn't the thing that I think I'm proud of. It is like to be able to create something so incredible and valuable that you get on the radar of these, industry behemoths and they see like, oh, wow, we need this thing because they've created the future of something. And that's a really interesting signal, to me. I think the headcount growth being at Morning Brew when we were 15 people, when I left, we were a little over 300 people. And really, on the revenue side, helping grow a company over 20x in 3.5 years. Those are all, numbers driven things that I am very proud of. But the thing that I think I am most proud of, and I PDF'd it because it brings me tears of joy when I read it. But, when I was leaving, I posted on Twitter and LinkedIn about just kind of like the journey and what's next. And, the number of people who had reached out to me on that platform and on text and email to let them know that, outside of the professional leadership that, I had made an impact on their lives, and, they want to take a lot of the learnings and things and, apply that to their careers and their lives like that. There's something very special about that when you can, make an impact on people both inside of the, the workplace and outside.
Yeah, and you often don't realize it until you're like out of the thick of it, or make an exit of some sort, whether that's selling or a new job and stuff like that. To that end, like you talked about being there when there were 15 employees, leading up to over 300 and stuff. Over the course of your career, you've worked at some, I would say, behemoths. Everything is relative, but some large scale companies, I presume. Lots of bureaucracy and red tape and stuff like that. What's your overall opinion of working at quote unquote big companies, or even just like visible companies versus smaller companies? And if you had to give, advice to, say, someone coming out of college or something, what would you say the pros and cons are?
I'll work backwards because I think I have a pretty clear answer to that second question, is that someone coming out of school, and again, this is based on an experience of one, but starting small, I mean, the company that I started at, it was an agency in New York called Deep Focus, which, was one of like the first social engagement agencies.
You're gonna have to get Deep Focus to give us a sponsorship now for that free plug you just gave them.
The agency was like bought by Engine like a while ago.
Gotcha.
And
all right, they're off the hook.
But it was, small, integrated. I think it was like 60 or 70 people when I joined, but because it was small, I got exposed. I was on the media team, and I got exposure to the account team and the creative team and the comms team, because everyone was sitting pretty close by to each other, and you understand how what you are doing fits into like a larger thing. And that for me was really, really valuable, as was the ability to kind of stretch and own more aspects of what I was doing. And so, when I was there, it also gave me more opportunity to work with a lot of the publisher partners and vendors that, the agency was working with on behalf of our clients. And ultimately, a lot of those opportunities and relationships are largely responsible for the rest of my career. Now, that said, it can be very exhausting, I think, at a small company, because you are expected to and required to wear a lot of hats. You need to want to do that, and you have to do that. And so when you're at a larger company, you get more resources, you have more focus, you have more structure, you have, the ability to get really, really good, at a few specific things. And so, long-winded way of answering your questions, the first being like, I'm an advocate of starting small, and then from there getting some good experience, and then starting to build up more specific types of experience along the way. And then as it pertains to the two, if you look at my career and resume, I kind of I jumped back and forth a little bit. And for me, that was really valuable, because there was so much that you can learn at each that can apply to the other. Like, you should never go in and say like, I know how to do this because I've done something somewhere else and I'm going to apply it right away. But you get to learn something new, and then you start to realize all of the things that you had learned previously and how those things apply to the new, to the new role, to the new company. And in my experience, there's a lot of times where big companies are trying to figure out how to move more quickly, be more innovative, and act more like smaller companies.
Yep.
And smaller companies are constantly figuring out, how do we scale? How do we process size? How do we do a lot of those things, which you learn at a bigger company? And so there is so much knowledge and experience that can apply to each. It would be my biggest recommendation in the world as early-ish in your career, to try to have both of those kinds of experiences, so that you can really understand how businesses grow. At the end of the day, that is literally all we're all trying to do, is either grow our own business or grow someone else's business.
Sure.
Business and revenue growth is that's it, right? And so if you can really understand how businesses at different sizes operate and see growth, I think that puts you in a kind of an accelerated career path.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing out of what you just said that I agree with is exposure to as much as humanly possible as early on. And I kind of had the only, well, I've only had one, I would say, big company, a publicly traded automotive retailer was my very first like normal job after college. And it was just so slow. Like it took such long periods of time to make any decisions that I like at the beginning, I was like, oh, this is the norm. Like everywhere is like this. And then I went to a startup agency and was like, oh, that is just not the case. Like everything moves fast here. And I quickly learned, like, I joke at the age of 22, I was like, oh, I can't work in corporate America for the next 30 years. I know everybody has probably said that in some point in their life, but I was like, I can't work like this. Like I knew smaller and stuff like that. Just, I think it's important to have both as well, to know what you like better and stuff like that. There's pros and cons to all of it. But to your point, I think the biggest thing is exposure to as much as you possibly can wherever you are as early as possible is super important to your own success.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, that it changes a little bit as you get older and more experienced, but the concept that like I talk about a lot is like this concept of collecting dots so that you can connect them later. It's not something that I've coined. I know like Steve Jobs has like
should. That's good.
I attempted a whole like LinkedIn thought leadership series called Collecting Dots, but it's the concept is that like you should always be having new experiences, meeting new people, like collecting all of that kind of stuff, because at a certain point, your brain is going to be put in a position, or you'll be put in a position where then you can connect those things, those experiences and those people and all of that kind of stuff. And it can be in different ways and in ways that might be entirely unexpected. But if you don't have those experiences and people, your view is ultimately like a lot more myopic than you think. And so that is like, as maybe like a cap to the, advice thing is, for anyone listening and starting their career, or, looking for a career renaissance or pivot, even, it's like, get out of your comfort zone and like go meet people, like go have experiences, like go do things that may feel really like odd or different or whatever, because it may seem like really extra odd and weird at the time, but like so many times I get inspired by like random things, or someone who I met happens to know someone else, and that leads to another conversation and another opportunity. It's I don't know, the world ends up being, I think, a lot more interconnected than we give it credit for.
No, I think the collecting dots thing is something that you should coin. Truthfully, like when people ask like how I started You Should Talk To, I joke that I was unintentionally building it for like a decade, but I was more so doing what you're talking about. I've just always been very open to conversation, and you collect all these dots, and then one day you're like, oh shit, like I have a business, or like I'm doing this now, and you can sometimes you collect so many dots you can't even backtrack, like how did we even get here and stuff like that. But yeah, I think being open to, within reason, like just even when people ask me like, hey, I'm looking for a job, my initial thing is stop applying to jobs and have as many conversations as humanly possible until you are exhausted by it, like, because that's how everybody gets everything done in this world.
100%. I mean, how I'm here today is through Alan McGee, who we both know. But even how I got connected to Alan originally was I was in Atlanta at the same time as my wife, and Alan was my wife's client. And I joined her like when she went to go meet him, just kind of like randomly. Alan and I met, became friends. And this is like 7 years ago, 8 years ago. But it's just like all things like that you don't necessarily always even see what the result is until 5, 8, 10 years down the road. It's just very cool when that's you can kind of like when you can trace some of it back. I think it's very cool.
No, I know you've built your career on it, but it sounds like you've built, or at least your last stop, but it sounds like you've built your personal, outlook on partnerships as well. What do you think makes up a strong partnership? I'd say You Should Talk To is essentially a giant partner program too. So I'm always looking for tips as well. Like to me, when I answer that question, it's enablement. So many people ask me like, oh, how built this, and people think like, oh, you put like agreements in place and then like things just start happening. I'm like, nah, that's step one. Then you got to still talk to these people like every 12 seconds to remind them you exist. So
Yeah.
what do you think?
That, yes. So like, I don't know if it's like camaraderie, presence, like, well, it's right, the relationship piece. I think, relationship is essential for any good partnership. And that stems from like time and effort and, and repetition and being helpful and not necessarily always expecting something back. Like, I think there are a lot of things that ultimately like ladder up to relationship. And so let's say like, relationship is a pillar one. Trust, I think that's like a good second pillar. And that is, being honest and, especially when there are transactional parts of the partnership, it's, it can be very easy to only have like your best interests in mind. And that can mislead, your partner, or, you may not ultimately get them what they need to succeed as well. And it's, trust is one of those things that takes a really long time to build. But that's lost in a second. So I would say like, relationship, trust, and then, the third thing is results. I think you need all three of those things in order to make a partnership really, really strong. And because if you have those first two, but everything that you're trying to do together doesn't work, a lot of the times it ultimately comes down to the fact that like, we are in business.
Sure.
And people need to show success to their company, to their boss, they need to make money. There are so many things that ultimately do need to happen at the end of the day. And so I think those pillars are probably the biggest ones. And I will add to the second one, trust piece, and just like accountability as a sub pillar to that is something that I cannot say with more conviction really how important that is. Being able to like own up to a mistake and being able to say you're going to do something when you do something, like that all to me ladders up to trust, but I think it is really, really important.
I'd say under that too, like from what I see, whether it's partnerships or even just like referral relationships, expectations and time, I would put under that bucket of trust as well. Of like, I just see so many people go in with like misaligned expectations, typically in the context of agency and brand, where even if they've talked about it a little bit, like agency has one thing in mind, brand has another thing in mind. And then also just time in general. Like, I think it's the narrative on LinkedIn a lot around like salespeople is, oh, like these terrible sales outreaches and stuff like that. In the context of time, I think it's impossible to not do what they're doing when goals are short-term goals and stuff like that, which is, most sales orgs and stuff like that. But in the context of partnerships, I think you have to have the right expectations and aligned there, but also like give it enough time. I see a lot of people have the expectation that like, oh, we did this thing, we put this out in the world, and like, it's day 4. Like, where's all the stuff? Where's the gold? Which is generally not the case. And I find usually the biggest successes are like the long-term partnerships.
Absolutely.
What do you think of agencies in general? I've seen a big cataclysmic shift, especially since COVID, a little before actually, because I was at a small agency. I've seen a big shift, especially since then, though, of big brands, big name companies kind of shifting towards smaller independent agencies that specialize and call it 1 to 2 or maybe 3 services. Have you seen that? And what do you think of that?
Well, I think there is something very interesting about these smaller agency, not because it's a smaller agency, but I think it's more about the pulling experts from wherever they are, having different subject matter experts like actually sitting together. And I think it comes down to the de-siloization. And so, smaller agencies do that kind of just by default. They are smaller agencies, but I think you also see a lot of the bigger agencies creating these groups or these like specialized sub or mini agencies, that can service specific brands, that can service specific functions or whatever it is. So I think that trend is likely to continue. But I don't necessarily think it is unique to the size of the total agency, but it's more of just kind of like a focus, for them, because even you can make a large agency smaller. And so I think a lot of those larger agencies do see the opportunity to create something like custom and unique, and that is cross-disciplinary to service brands.
Yeah, I think it's a lot around optics, truthfully. And I think COVID kind of democratized a little. I used to see bigger brands just, based on everything is based on your previous experience, but not being as open to talking to a quote unquote smaller agency because they didn't think that they had, call it the breadth or just the capability to handle, in their minds, a large project or a large account and stuff like that. And COVID kind of showed there's a lot of talent everywhere. There's a lot of talented agencies out there all over the country, not necessarily, in major metropolitans and stuff like that. So I think it more just opened people's eyes, especially at bigger brands, to the possibility of working with, smaller, more specialized shops.
Definitely. I mean, the last couple of years has been the great equalizer and for a lot of things. And I think I like seeing a more kind of equal playing field on that end. And I think, at times some of the larger agencies definitely had a leg up when, I feel like for all new pitches, I kept seeing articles in the trades and on Twitter, and everything ultimately came down to procurement.
Yep.
And the largest agencies ultimately have more buying power and, are able to get media and other things for less money. And so, if it ultimately came down to procurement, then the smaller agencies were kind of starting from behind a little bit. But to your point, I think there has been and will continue to be a shift that levels that playing field a little bit, which is great to see.
I hope so. Can you think of a really great either partnership or agency experience that you've had in the past, whether you were a participant of it or, you've seen it elsewhere, and what made it so great?
Yeah, there is one, when I was at Morning Brew, and we created a, fully custom branded podcast with a brand. And, the agency took a chance on us, on behalf of the brand. And it was the start of something really special because we hadn't done this particular thing before, but we had done really good work, and we beat out much, much bigger publishers and players in the space.
Sure.
And, we developed just a really, really good, honest, transparent type of relationship. And part of what makes it so good is not that it was successful and we're on season 3 of that custom podcast, but it was the adversity, which actually, there were challenging times when you're dealing with, talent and the video and audio recording and all of those kinds of things. But the adversity really came from a different pitch where we were talking to this agency about a launch of a new vertical. And, for a number of reasons, the launch sponsorship went to a different client and agency. And the difficult, and I mean, when I say difficult, it's the worst, hardest, emails and conversations that
Sure.
I've had to have ever. That experience sucked, but strengthened the relationship between us and the agency, us and the brand, me and, the investment leads on the agency side so much in going through that relationship. And the biggest takeaway is that if your relationship with a partner is only based on good experiences, it's kind of incomplete, and it's not tested.
It's not a real partnership.
It's not a real part. Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's, it's you need to go through some shit, and that matters, and it sucks. And so I guess the biggest piece of advice stemming from that is to don't shy away from those types of conversations. And when that type of challenge happens, like, go into it, take ownership and accountability. Yes, absolutely. And work through it. Don't expect like an immediate resolve, but like you will get there if you stay the course, and that relationship after the fact will be even stronger, than it was before. And those types of things are, I don't know, that's like, that's like partnership goals right there.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Most of the agencies that I still work with 2 years into this are from day one. And truthfully, to your point, like delivering negative feedback that I've gotten from a brand about an agency or telling them that they've lost and stuff like that, and winning together and losing together is truthfully what has strengthened it 100% and not sugarcoating. Because to your point, like trust and transparency. And yeah, if, for anybody, not just me, if me delivering bad news that I had no control over, tarnishes our relationship, then a relationship it was not in the first place to begin with, I would say. So totally agree there. Can you think of, we'll talk some shit now. Can you think of a bad partnership that you've seen, been a part of, or agency experience in the past, and what made it so bad or negative?
I can. I
didn't want to trigger you. I hope this
No. It's right. I'm just going to like blank stare.
Yeah. I can. Oh, you want to hear about it?
No, I won't give, specifics, but it's
sure. Yeah. We don't shame anybody here.
No, I mean, it's like, it's kind of like the inverse of the, what we were just talking about, which is like this has happened to, a few different times where, we will get the opportunity and we put so much time and effort into making sure we got all the details right, making sure that just like the idea is perfect and it answers like every single thing that was in the brief for the RFP. And, we'll send it in and crickets. And we ask for follow-up crickets. And then ultimately when we find out we didn't win, it's just a no. Like no feedback, no nothing. And it's hard because, you get your hopes up a little bit. You get really excited. Like, we care. We put like a lot of time. We think this stuff is like actually cool. And we understand that if we put together a good idea, it's actually good for, the brand and the agency too. And this happened pre-pandemic also, but I think it got worse.
This is in the context of Morning Brew as well, correct?
Yeah, it's been Morning Brew, but I'm
just saying for anybody listening out there, if Morning Brew is getting ghosted and you are, it should, truthfully, like give you a little bit of solace, like that you're not the only one experiencing this. So.
Yeah, no, it happens. Like it happened when I was at Morning Brew. It happened when I was at Live Nation. It happened when I was at Thrillist. It happened when I was at Yahoo. Like, and like when I was at Yahoo, over a decade ago, it's like, one of the biggest companies on earth. And it's like the fact that we would still get like, either ghosted or we're a last minute consideration. Like there was like one time at Yahoo where I got an email from a partner that was like, hey, we want you to participate in this RFP. It's due at 2 p.m. It was sent at like 12.
Sure. What else did you have?
I was just like, actually like we didn't end up responding, but I printed it out and put it on my wall. And I was just like, this is like a wall of fame or wall of shame or something. But like, I don't know what it is, but this has to go up here. So the idea of the ghosting or, the general disrespect or whatever it is, a lot of that I think happens and has gotten worse over the last couple of years because relationships and also, sorry, I don't know if you can hear my daughter.
Bring them on the podcast.
Because a lot of the relationships have shifted to almost more transactional and more email. And it's like, you don't know the person on the other side. And it's like, it becomes less because it's just like less of a real relationship. And, I think you're going to see, I know we talked about, pendulum shifts at the beginning of the episode, but to bring that full circle also, I think the importance of, IRL and real FaceTime and real relationships is going to, I think it already has been a little bit, but I think it's going to continue to make a very meaningful comeback.
Yeah. And I think to your point, like that's such an easy, low hanging fruit way to collect more dots and like not be a total shithead on either side of just communicating. And as simple as a quick, like, hey, we went another direction, and one line of feedback is really all it takes, I think.
That's a good takeaway. Don't be a shithead.
It really is. I'm not kidding. That's the title of the book. If I ever write one, is "Don't Be a Shithead." I'm not kidding. It's funny. Like in the context of agency world, Kristen Cavallo, who's the head of the Martin agency, talks a lot about like how brands and agencies like should be treating each other and stuff like that. And it is one of the, the rules of engagement for me. I'm putting my name behind these things. I'm introducing you to partners. And I still like it's less in the context of me because they have to ghost agencies and me. So usually, like, at least I'm getting feedback and stuff like that. But it is just mind boggling to me. I oftentimes do get asked by brands, like, hey, they'll hire one of my agencies and then they're going to tell like two others no. Like, should we tell them? I'm like, yeah, like the answer is never no to that question. Of course you should tell them. Like,
right.
they're like, are they going to freak out? I'm like, I hope not. But like, see how it goes. Just tell them no,
Yeah.
It's insane the amount of it still goes on. I guess there's a certain point where I think it's the wrong thing, truthfully. Like if you're having like a general call with someone, and you don't want to move into the next round, I think that's one thing. But like if that people have taken the time to put together like a data-driven proposal and stuff like that and pulled in multiple team members, like it's a bad look to not provide feedback and give the no that everyone. So I think it would also get rid of a lot of the bad sales practice we see out there, because just give them a no and they will stop.
Yeah, it's like a lot of the times it doesn't necessarily need to be good news. We just need closure.
Yeah,
and to understand that we can kind of move on, because even like within sales organizations, at every level of management and leadership, there's always like a roll up and looking at pipeline and need to just understand, because if something's not going to work, then that that sales team needs to figure out something else that will.
Yeah.
To hit quotas and all that kind of stuff, because at the and that's a pretty important measurement tool at the end of the day. So
do you think once an agency or partnership experience has soured, or like that seed of doubt has been planted, or like a deadline has been missed, do you think it's salvageable, or kind of once you cross that bridge, there's no turning back?
No, I think if there's like a reason, if there is a solution, and if there's accountability for it, you can absolutely get a second chance. If it happens like 2 or 3 times, then it's, I think, a little bit more of a thing. But I think with the right like attitude and solutions to issues or challenges happening once, I think that's actually fine. But again, it's like being solutions oriented and taking accountability for it.
Sure.
Making up for it. But if it's something that does continue to happen, then that's a little harder to say, because then there's clearly like a larger issue.
I think you get one small one and one big one, and it's better if they happen early on.
Yep.
If it happens further in, you should probably know better at that point. But
agreed.
Yeah. You just talked about in real life stuff, events and all that. We've got NFTs. We had some shocking news in the crypto world the past couple of days and stuff like that. What are you most bullish on and pumped about just in marketing and technology in general these days?
I am intrigued to see that like the creator economy pendulum shift that we talked about earlier. I am intrigued by like the right kind of tokenization that may not necessarily be like NFTs, but what it can do for like loyalty and like, customer data, and how brands can actually better communicate with their communities and turn them into like actual communities, becomes very interesting to me. And the IRL components too, like their conferences and events and all that kind of stuff. It's just like, there are ways to collect more dots, right? So that I remain bullish on that.
Besides your child who was crying a moment ago, what keeps you up at night? Mostly from a business standpoint.
Well, I mean, knock on wood, she's a pretty good sleeper.
That's good.
The things that keep me up at night is like, well, the ad market, and if that's able to turn a corner or not, just because I think that is such an awesome thing when it's working well, when it enables content to be free, and good advertising and good creative is awesome. Like that was something I think Morning Brew, did and does extremely well, is the creative and advertising. So that, some of that stuff kind of keeps me up at night. And then the politics of the world, the larger things happening however, I try very hard to focus on the things that I can control and not so that I can sleep at night, because I've heard is a pretty important thing.
Yeah, I'm with you. If you think about everything going on in the world, that's very, very overwhelming sense of just ridiculousness. So yeah, focus on what you can is good advice, I would say.
Absolutely.
Final work-related question, and I get a couple fun
Yes.
ones for you. What's next for you? You may not know the answer to that question.
It is something I'm still, I'm planning it out. I'm figuring it out right now. It's this time that I have post Morning Brew. It's just been really great to actually spend a bit more time with my daughter and take her to classes. And
hopefully you're sleeping a little bit better at the moment, at least.
I am sleeping a little bit better, and I'm having a lot of really great conversations with industry friends and, folks at agencies and brands and publishers. And, I think for me, what's next is, again, on that kind of like creator side of things, I'm just kind of fascinated by what the future of that is. And so, maybe I'll look to dabble a little bit in that world more than I had previously.
Nice. Well, if there's anything we can do to help here, we're happy to help. But the final few questions we've got for you. What was your very, very, very first job?
Ooh, very, very, very first job I was a lacrosse camp counselor.
Lacrosse camp counselor. I was going to say, did that prepare you for what the world you're in these days? I would presume maybe management and coaching in general.
Trying to wrangle lots of people, and especially if you go into a startup as someone who's a bit more, I don't know, seasoned or experienced than a lot of others, it's something helpful.
Sure,
but definitely less applicable than other jobs that I've had. That one was just a lot of fun because I loved playing lacrosse when I was younger.
Sure. What would your final meal be?
This is tough. My final meal would be a steakhouse meal, and the starter. Do I get a starter and a main?
You get the whole meal. I'm curious if it's a specific steakhouse first off.
No, I mean there are a couple of good ones, like go-tos that I have, but I would say to start, shrimp cocktail, oysters, and a very, very dry vodka martini with a twist. And then
you can go you can opt for the seafood tower if you want to just.
Oh, then seafood tower. Absolutely. Yeah. Right. Last meal, seafood tower with a great martini to start. And then the main would be probably a porterhouse, medium rare, which is just a really nice, medium to full, not full heavy cab, but, something in that family, maybe just a touch lighter. And some cream spinach, naturally.
That would be presumably either that type of meal or sushi would be my final meal. It would be tossed up.
I like that. I mean, you go for like the most epic omakase meal of all time.
Ever. And then my final question for you. Who is somebody who inspires you, either personally, professionally, or both, and why?
Ooh, someone who inspires me personally, professionally, or both. I don't know. That is a really tough one and a really good question. I always looked up to Jon Stewart.
I love Jon Stewart.
That was like a very religious, not like a religious experience, but it was like a religious experience in that like every night it was a habit. Like I was watching The Daily Show.
Sure.
And the way that his personality came out in a way that was funny, and he was so smart and able to interview people really well. Like he was interesting by being interested and asking like really amazing questions, and like people, it looked like everyone was having a really good time, on that. And I think that has guided a lot of my thinking in terms of how I, get information and how I communicate with people, and trying to ask really good questions as well. But yeah, I think his combination of intelligence and humor and eloquence was just something I think that made a really big impact on me growing up.
And I would say now more than ever, just his utter lack of giving a shit in terms of like telling the truth and transparency and like cutting through the BS and whatever ramifications occur, it happens,
Very true.
which I very much appreciate about his newest pieces of content as well.
Me too.
But thank you very much for joining, Jason. This was awesome. I cannot tell you how overjoyed I am that we made it through without any technical difficulties as far as I know. Hopefully all the footage was captured and it appears it has. But if anybody wanted to find you, I presume LinkedIn would be the best, most non-intrusive way of getting in touch with you. And yeah, I look forward to seeing what's next for you and keeping in touch as well.
Amazing. Me too. And thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you for checking out this episode of You Should Talk To. This show is brought to you by the company with the same name, You Should Talk To, a company that helps marketing leaders find the right agency or freelancer for their situation. If you enjoyed what you learned in this episode, make sure to follow You Should Talk To wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or visit YouShouldTalkTo.com for more information.